Good morning. This is the halfway mark of our Seattle Practitioner class. And it can be the most important day of your life, more important than the day you were born or the day you pass on. It can be. It started out that way with me this morning. What I say this morning, I would like to ask that you keep within yourself, that you do not discuss with anyone outside of this room for a long time to come. First place, it won't be a simple matter for you to explain it to anyone, nor would it do them any good if you explained it, because this has nothing to do with telling somebody something. It has to do with an experience that you will have to have, and no one else can have it for you, and no one else can have it until they're ready for it. And certainly you cannot benefit anybody by telling it to them before you've had the experience yourself. And so if you do discuss it with anyone, no matter how close they may be to you, remember this, that you are not benefiting them, and you probably are depriving yourself of the experience. It is only the things that are revealed to us in secret that are shouted from the housetops. The subject has to do with God, with our understanding of God, and with our experience of God. John says to you in Scripture that God is love. The Hebrew says God is a lawgiver. God is law. The New Testament says God is life. And as you come into metaphysics, you'll find that God is principle, mind, substance. Now, after you know these words for God, do you know any more about God than you knew before? Or do you just know some more names for God? It is just as if you had never met me, and today someone tells you about Joel. And then you want to know about Joel, and so somebody says he's a son, and somebody else says he's a brother, and somebody else says he's a friend, somebody else says he's a teacher. Do you still know Joel, or do you just know some more things about Joel? You still do not know Joel. You still have no experience with Joel. And so I can go through Scripture, and I can go through the Scriptures of the world, and I can go through metaphysical writings and add to these synonyms until you have about 40, 50, or 60 different names for God. And now, what will you actually know about God? More names. And each of these names represents a concept of God. When John has an experience, a God experience, and then comes out of it and says, God is love, John is revealing to you a concept of God based on his experience. So far as he is concerned, it's an experience. He knows not only what God is, but he knows what love is because he's had the experience. You haven't met God and haven't had love, so you neither know what God is or what love is. And if you say God is love, immediately you think of some form of love with which you're already acquainted. It may be parental love, filial love, sisterly love, brotherly love, marital love, neighborly love. But you surely know that John didn't mean that when he said God is love. Because he wasn't speaking of human beings and their kind of love or their concepts or expressions of love. He was talking about God. Now, God, perhaps to him, was unknown until that revelation came, showing forth God as love. Now he knows both God and love. But he knows God in a way that we can never know God through the letters G-O-D. He knows love in a way that we can never know, judging it by our finite human standard. And if we were to just multiply that, we would just have an exaggerated man-God. Again, and it has been rightly said that if there were no God, man would create one for himself. In other words, there is no way to prevent yourself forming a concept of God. Everyone in the world, rightly, is seeking that which we call God. Mostly we're seeking God through the human mind. And so we put human evaluation on God. Now, the most generally accepted concept of God is that he is a magnified Santa Claus, someone who has all the great gifts of the world and is sitting up there behind the North Pole with him, and we are going to write letters in the form of prayers and see if we can get a delivery, free on board if possible, but if not, we'll pay a little, even tithe sometimes, if we can just be sure that we'll get some of those blessings delivered at our front door, back door, delivery door. But never forget this, that the most universally held concept of God is as a glorified Santa Claus. And if you examine yourself, you'll find how much of a Santa Claus he is in your own thought. Now then, God is not Santa Claus. God is sitting nowhere with a bag full of gifts, withholding them, and waiting for us either to voice the correct prayer or find the right posture or the right practitioner or the correct form or formula. There is no such God. The ages have proven that there is no such God. Our modern day living in the world, the condition of the world, shows there is no such God. And so, those who have found sufficient discords in their lives, sufficient unhappinesses, have found their way to metaphysical studies and they have gained a somewhat higher concept of God. There's far less of Santa Claus God in our consciousness, in our thought, than there is in most people out in the world. I say our, I mean the metaphysical world. There's toast in there that I just do not seem able to dynamite out. Thank you. Now, since we have come to the study of metaphysics, and this includes everybody that has touched Christian Science or Unity or New Thought, we have gotten somewhat away from that Santa Claus God, but not entirely. And the space that has been emptied out, we have filled with terms like God is mind, God is soul, God is life, God is spirit, God is substance, God is law. And I can assure you that these are far, far higher concepts of God than the Santa Claus God to which most of the world prays. But I'm emphasizing to you that these still are concepts of God. Now we've changed from Bible concepts to some of Mrs. Eddy's concepts, to some of Mrs. Fillmore's concepts, to some of Mr. Holmes's concepts, and so forth and so on. Now we have found other teachers, modern teachers, who have presented to us newer, higher concepts of God, closer, undoubtedly closer, to the reality of God itself, closer to an understanding of God itself. Naturally, we ourselves have finitized some of those meanings. For instance, we're told that God is mind, infinite intelligence, and when you examine yourself, you really see how nearly you believe that that's some kind of human intelligence on a grander scale. There isn't that kind of intelligence at all. Just as God is love has no relationship whatsoever to any form of love with which we're acquainted. We speak of God as principle, and immediately we think what a cold term principle is. Isn't the kind of a loving God that we thought of when we were thinking of God as Father. That is because we have an idea of a mathematical principle. We have an idea of an engineering principle, and immediately we have God as a glorified mathematical principle or engineering principle, whereas the word principle itself, in connection with God, has no relationship whatsoever to the word principle that's in the dictionary. So while we do have a higher concept through these words, remember, they are still concepts, finite ones and incorrect ones, a little closer to truth, still finite, still incorrect. Now, our treatments or prayers at the present time are voiced not to God, because we haven't yet known what God is, so we don't know the language with which to speak to God. We do not know how to phrase prayers to a God whom we do not know. And so what we are doing is we are addressing our prayers to our concept of God. And we're expecting an answer. And there can't be any answers, because a concept of God is as without power as a concept that you may entertain of a person. The concept you entertain has no relationship to the person themselves. It represents your opinion, your judgment, your view but not necessarily does it represent the individual. That is why we have so many differing concepts of each other, so many different opinions about each other, because we're entertaining our own opinion instead of having the ability to see him as he is. Now then, it is a rightful activity to take the synonyms of God as they are in Scripture and the synonyms of God that you have learned in your metaphysical studies, and continue with ever new and ever higher concepts of God, but at the same time remembering within you that is not God itself. That represents another aspect of God, facet of God, or phase of God. Now, the day ultimately comes when we read in Scripture, and by that time the letters are apt to be about that tall, even if it's of a tiny Bible. We're apt to read, "Acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace." And then something takes place within our being. And we say, what? What is that? Acquaint now thyself with him. I thought I am acquainted with him. Isn't God mind, life, truth, love, spirit, Father, Mother, Christ, Jehovah? And the answer comes back, no. Those are just more names for the God with which you have not yet become acquainted. There has been our weakness in our studies. We've learned a lot about God, much more than we ever knew before. We have come much closer to an awareness of God through knowing that God is mind, life, principle, soul, spirit, than when we just thought of God as a glorified Father, a wonderful Father, but a little bit supered up. And we've even gone further than believing that God is Father, Mother. Because again, we have this glorified human sense of what fatherhood is and what motherhood is. When we, like Paul, say, I can do all things through Christ, now we're lost. Because Christ is a word that nobody can possibly define. You can't even find a definition of it in the dictionary. It's an impossibility for anyone to draw a mental image of what Christ is. That's why the Chinese have a wonderful word for Christ. It's wonderful because no matter what dictionary of the world you look or what language, there is no description of it. The word is Tao. T-A-O. And you can't get anything more meaningless than that into your thought. And yet, it is a wonderful word, one of the most wonderful of all the names of God. Why? Because you can't make a mental image of it. You can't form a concept of it. You cannot visualize it. You cannot finitize it, because there's nothing in your mind that has any similarity to the word Tao. That's why the word Christ, to me, is one of the most wonderful of all we have in our language, because I would defy anybody to visualize what Christ is. Take away the man Jesus now, forget him, because he is not Christ. He is Christed. Now, you cannot define Christ. You cannot search around in your mind for anything to fit the word into. to use for comparison, to use for visualization. Neither can you with the word Tao. There you are, you're stuck with it. And that is the greatest blessing that can come to you. This that I'm telling you is the greatest blessing that can come to you in a lifetime. The moment you can have some idea of God presented to you that you cannot immediately visualize, compare, formulate an idea of, that moment you are out on a limb with a saw going right through it. And pretty soon, if you stick with the word Christ or Tao, you'll find yourself suspended in midair with nothing to stand on. That's when you'll begin to really know God, because God is like nothing that can be known. God is like nothing that can be visualized, thought about. God is like nothing that can be seen, heard, tasted, touched, smelled, or reasoned about, or analyzed, or defined. Now, the moment you get close to some idea of God which cannot be formulated in your thought, you're getting close to a realization of the infinite invisible. You can't take those words and do anything with them either in your mind. They won't fit into your mind. The word infinite can't fit into your mind. You cannot grasp with your mind what infinity means. And certainly you can't know what invisible means, because the invisible has never been seen. Now you've got nothing to compare it with, nothing to surround it with, nothing to visualize it by. Now you're really commencing to comprehend the nature of God. Many years ago, I wrote that you can only begin to discern God when you can see the invisible, hear the inaudible, and know the unknowable. And here about a year or two ago, I received a book from England, and in it was Francis Thompson's poems with those same lines in them. Same lines. You see, there's only one mind, but that mind is far beyond our ability to grasp, because it enables us to know the unknowable. Something like that happened here yesterday. A telephone call came to me from a woman who has some family difficulty, wanting help, and saying that a Hindu teacher in India, in northern India, had caught a vision of her and her problem and had sent a message over here that on this date a man would be in Seattle who could help her, and the man could be located through Mrs. Holmes. And his name was Joel. You can't understand that any more than I can. If any one of us try to, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to be in trouble. Because that is an activity of God, and you don't know what God is or what the activity of God is, but we see the effect of it in those experiences. We see the effect of it, of God at work in those experiences. Some years ago there was a similar experience. A woman in Virginia was having difficulty, and she had a practitioner working for her, and they were not making progress. One night this lady, the patient, had a dream, and in this dream the name Goldsmith appeared, and that was all. But she didn't know any Goldsmith. And so when she saw her practitioner next, she told the practitioner about it, and the practitioner says, I don't know any Goldsmith, so I don't know the meaning of the dream. But a few days later, a book arrived from the Willing Publishing Company announcing a new book by Joel Goldsmith. And the practitioner received that notice, showed it to the woman. That's the man, that's the man, that's the name. You don't understand that, and I don't understand that. Years before that happened, in my first year of practice in New York City, long before I knew anything about Christian Science church work, I'd just become a member, knew nothing of its workings, had no idea that they did prison work or anything of that kind. A young man came to me and said that he was an usher at the Christian Science Services in New York prison and wanted to go on vacation, but they couldn't go on vacation unless they could provide a substitute. And the substitute had to be somebody qualified, like a practitioner, or if not a practitioner, well qualified, class taught. Would I like to substitute as usher for him in the prison services? And I had heard nothing about them, and he explained what it was, and I said, yes, I think that would be interesting. So he went down to the chairman of the New York committee, who had charge of 8 New York prisons, said that he wanted to go on vacation, and that he had found a substitute. He said, all right, if you have a substitute, you can have your vacation. What's the name? And he said, Joel Goldsmith. She looked at him and said, No, he's not your substitute for usher. He's my reader. What do you mean? He's my demonstration. We have an opening for a reader in Riker Island Prison, and before going to bed the other night, I sat down to pray, to do my work, to know that the reader would be supplied, and during the night I dreamed the name Goldsmith. But I don't know any Goldsmith, and I didn't know what connection it had with my prayer. I didn't connect it at all until just now, when you mentioned, then I knew that's my Goldsmith, and he's my reader. And I received the appointment in that hour as first reader of Riker Island Prison, breaking all church committee rules, because the rule was that you first had to give a trial hearing and be satisfactory, then you had to have 3 trial weeks of reading in the prison, and if everybody agreed you were all right, then you got a 3-year appointment. But I received a 3-year appointment on the telephone immediately because she had dreamed her reader. You don't understand that any more than I do. It's one of those things. If you truthfully say that God is the activity of your life, then you must expect such things to happen, because God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform, and his ways are not man's ways, and his thoughts are not God's thoughts. And so, if a person is desperately trying to find relief, and there is somebody in the world that can be an instrument for it, there's no reason why God shouldn't reveal their name to it. Now, as a matter of fact, you have, of course, seen the same miracle take place by having some need and somebody just putting the right book in your hand, or taking you to the correct meeting, or leading you to the correct teacher or center or church. Those were miracles of the same order, only it goes a little deeper where an actual name is mentioned like that. But it's only a matter of degree. It's the same identical thing as having a need and praying, oh, God, help me, and then somebody the next day coming and saying, can I take you to Christian Science Church or Unity Center, or would you read this book? That's a miracle. That's God's way of fulfilling your need on a level that you can understand. The same as God's meeting Rickenbacker's need by putting birds on his head, or having fish jump up out of the water into the boat, or rain fall out of a clear sky, or manna falling for Moses, or a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. You don't understand those things, neither do I. At best, we can say God is. What God is, I do not know. God is. An infinity there must be. invisible it must be, since no one's ever told us of having seen God. Visions of God, yes. Visions that look like Jesus, or look like our idea of what Jesus looked like, or what some painter's concept of Jesus was. But actually, nobody has said, I have seen God. That was my eyes. Now then, yet in my flesh I have seen God. Does not mean that we have seen God as a form, figure, or outline, since you know as well as I do that God could not be encompassed in form, figure, or outline and still be infinite. No. Things of God are foolishness with man, and the natural man receiveth not the things of God. So at best, you can take some kind of a name that has no other connotation in your thought, like Tao or Christ or Spirit or Soul. Any of those are good, because surely you don't know what Spirit is. Surely you don't know what Soul is. All right? Those are fine synonyms then, because they will keep you from formulating a concept of God and then praying to the concept. And certainly you don't want to pray to the word soul, and you don't want to pray to the word spirit. You know, we're getting in a tight corner here, because pretty soon we're not going to have anything to pray to. And then you see, that is when, if we do get in that corner, if we can get backed in far enough to where we can actually say, you've taken my Lord away from me, now we're in prayer. Now we're praying. Because the moment I can take from you, or anyone else can, every concept of God you've ever entertained, you're apt to find yourself standing right in the presence of God itself. But not while you have a concept out here that stands in the way of God realization. God is. Let no one ever doubt that. God is. But let no one dare say what God is, or who God is, or why God is, or in what manner God is. Only God is. And now, with that complete blank that follows the two words, God is. Not God is love, or God is life, or God is spirit. Just God is. In that blank, inwardly will flash into you the realization or experience of God. And you won't be able to go out and say, now I can tell you what God is, because you won't know that in any way at all that can be defined humanly to another. Oh yes, you may do as John did and say, yes, God is love, but that won't do it for them. You may be able to do as Miss Eddie did and say God is mind or principle. That won't do it for them. You might be able to do as I have and find God to be the infinite invisible, but that won't do it for you. That doesn't give you a bit of a picture. No. You still are left with the fact that if God is the infinite invisible, that's my idea or my realization. And if God is love, that's John's realization. You still have yours to attain. And when you do, even if you coin another infinite invisible, or life, truth, or love, it will just be another synonym out in the world, so far as the world is concerned, even though to you it's as clear as that picture on the wall. But to others it will just be another synonym to add to those they already have, until that day comes when they declare, God is, and that's all I know. God is. And I won't let my mind go further. I'll wait with that until God reveals itself within my being, until God discloses himself. When he does, it may not even be a he. It may not even be a combination of he and she. Now do you see why prayer cannot be as effective as it should while we are addressing prayer to our concept of what should answer us? we almost have an idea, having known what we were going to pray for, what the answer should appear like. And yet God is spirit. If God answered us in spirit, and God does, probably that's why we miss the answer. We're looking for it in matter. We're looking for it in some form that the human mind can comprehend. And so we're missing it. Like starting out looking for the North Pole, passing it up because it isn't painted red and white. That's the only kind of poles we're familiar with, barber's poles or telephone poles. And here we go right over the place and we don't see any such pole there, so we keep going because the pole didn't look like what we expected. And so we're sure it wasn't there. That's true of God. We're turning to a God who is spirit, asking for a spiritual blessing, and out here we're looking in the mail for $10 bills or looking at the body for a little more body or a little less body. And if it doesn't come that way, well, I guess God didn't answer our prayer. Now, our work this morning is revealing that most of what we know about God isn't God at all, nor is it knowledge about God, but rather concepts of God, ideas or opinions of God, rather than the experience of God itself. Very much like forming a concept of a person you're going to meet, and then when you meet them find that they weren't at all like what you had expected, because your concept wasn't based on them, it was based on some opinion you had formed of them from what you had heard from someone else who had also formed their opinion of them. So with God, most of us entertain a view of God that we have built up because of the view of God that Mrs. Fillmore, Mrs. Eddy, John, and a few others, Moses, had built up for us. And we've taken their idea of God and built onto it something else and made it our idea of God. And there's God all the time, unknown to us. Now, the question that comes to us is this: is God knowable? Is it possible to know God? Is it possible to experience God? And the answer definitely is yes. But God cannot be known with the mind. God cannot be known with the intellect. God cannot be known through reasoning or thinking processes. It is true that thinking through thoughts, ideas of God, as we have been doing here for 45 minutes, 43 minutes, will lead us up to an elevation of consciousness or an atmosphere in which we can discern God. We're not throwing away the thinking process or reasoning process or analyzing process. We're not throwing away our human intelligence. We are using all of these as stepping stones. In other words, when the ancients had God as sun, moon, or stars, and some of greater vision saw that that could not be. God couldn't be anything that existed as form. And so we came across to the Hebrew lands and finally found a God who is invisible. So much so that when Moses is going to commune with God, he goes way off on a mountain where none of his followers can see him, because they wouldn't believe that he was communing with God, because if they were standing there and didn't see God, they'd know that Moses was giving them a raw deal. He was claiming to talk to God, but I can see he isn't there. So Moses, too wise to take such chances, let no one go with him except Aaron. And he probably had told the secret to Aaron that God is within. God is a spirit. God doesn't appear outwardly as a man, even though our Hebrew ancestors called him Father. But it isn't a father. It isn't an old gentleman with a beard. But there's no way to tell that to these people at that time, and so Moses does his communing all alone. Maybe that's why Jesus went up to the mountain to do his 40 days of communing. Probably his people would not have believed that he was in direct contact with God without seeing something visible or tangible. It wasn't enough they saw the effects. They would have had to see the cause itself. Now then, we can come from the paganistic idea of God as sun, moon, and stars, and we can cross to the Hebrew lands and accept God as a father, God as Jehovah, God as a mighty warrior. We can travel along those holy lands until we come up to the great master, and we can begin to accept God not only as a father, but father within. Of course, that term really should have helped us, because the moment we have a father within us, we're really getting an impossibility. Now we really are getting an impossibility. Father within us. We can understand a baby within us, but we cannot understand a father within us. That even insults human intelligence. And so we should have seen then that our concept of God as father was all wrong. Because whatever father was, it was something within us. That should have destroyed the image of that old gentleman with a beard sitting on a cloud. But we can go along with the master and say, yes, what is fatherhood? And you get creative principle or creator. And then you can see, there is a creative principle within me. Now we're beginning to take it out of the term, the finite. We're taking it now out of that which is humanly knowable, because now we've got another wonderful term, creative principle. You can't visualize that. You can't compare it with anything. And nothing to compare it with. Nothing to visualize it with. And yet, that is the idea of God that the Master gave. Father, creative principle. We can go along from there until we reach our friend Paul. And he really has a stopped cold when he says, I live, yet not I, Christ liveth in me. And remember that Jesus called it the Father within me. Now we've got Father within me, Christ within me. Now the human mind is blanked, stopped right there. You can't go any further than that. You don't know what creative principle is. You don't know what Christ is. Now you're at the point where your mind is free and clear of all concepts, of all images, of all ideas. Unfortunate are those who came across the word Tao and had another puzzler and said, now it's worse because that's even a language I don't understand. Now we are blessed. Now we've come to the place where we stand on the brink and acknowledge, I cannot know what God is. I do not know what God is. There's no image in my mind, no thought, no concept, no awareness. I'm blank. Now we're a state of receptivity. Now we're a state of awareness. Now we're alert. Now we're alive. Now we've got something to live for. Now we've got a goal. We're better off now than Admiral Byrd when he hadn't found the North Pole or the South Pole. He had two wonderful goals ahead of him, but he attained them so quickly. And what has he got to do now? Nothing but sit around. Nowhere to go now. No more poles to discover. But I can tell you this, that even after you have found God, made the discovery, had the experience, you'll never be like Admiral Byrd. You won't have to sit around in retirement, because there's a deeper realization, a more profound one right ahead. And when you reach that, you'll say, well, I haven't even touched the hem of the robe. And you'll find that there are not enough years, even in God's calendar, to complete the search for God since God is both infinite and eternal, and you never can reach the end of time or space. And as long as you haven't reached the end of time or space, you haven't encompassed the wholeness of God. And so, finding God, experiencing God, is not just one or two experiences and say, well, I know that now. No. Every experience leads to a deeper one. Every experience leads to a more profound one. Well, you know, some of you who have sat in 6, 8, 10, 12 classes, listened to dozens of lectures, you wouldn't believe that all this was left to say this morning, would you? You just wonder where it all comes from. Yeah, it comes out of that infinity. And then you say, well, there can't be anything more to say after that. That's what I think, too. So I think you ought to declare the class off after this morning, and let's forget the rest of the week and just digest this. Can't be any more to say or reveal. And yet you know as sure as fate that tomorrow morning will come and we will not have reached the end of infinity or eternality. That there's no such thing as God going dry. Do you see that? So it is with this. Come to this brink of nothingness. Come to this brink of nothingness, of knowing nothing, to where you absolutely know that I have no idea of God, no concept of God, no picture, no form. No matter what I thought in the past, it isn't true. And what's more, there's no more use of going to books to find out what God is. Not anybody's books. No use going to teachers to find out what God is. Not any teacher. Because even Jesus didn't reveal it to many people. He couldn't. It's an individual experience that takes place within you. And all teachings and all teachers, if they're truly, honestly, on the spiritual path, must tell you that all they are doing is leading you back to the kingdom, the realm within yourself, where you can experience God. That's walking the last mile alone. Now, you won't stop reading books, you won't stop going to classes, but you will realize the purpose of reading books and the purpose of going to classes is merely to be lifted up into an elevation or atmosphere of consciousness in which you can discern God. In other words, you won't go out of this room the same elevation of consciousness in which you came into this room this morning. Oh, no. You never will go back there. At the end of our, was it Honolulu class that it came? That we would never return to the cocoon out of which we had emerged during that class. The liberty wherewith which Christ had clothed us would never return to a state of ignorance. And so I say to you, after this morning, you will never in your life go back to the same level of consciousness you were when you came in here this morning. That can't happen. You may have lots of ups and you may have lots of downs. You may have lots of problems before you. We all do. But you will never go back to the same level of consciousness you were. That can't happen. Not all the way back. And each time that we are led to this place of unknowing, not knowing, each time we're led to that brink, we're just on the verge of perceiving, apprehending, comprehending. And one of these fine days we'll slip right across, and there it will be. And so each time that you read books of an inspirational nature, of a truly spiritual nature, Every time you hear lectures or classes of a purely spiritual nature in the atmosphere of those who are on the spiritual path, each one of those experiences will lift you a notch higher in consciousness, and one of these days you'll be right at that level where you'll look right over into heaven. I had the experience one time before the writing of The Infinite Way, when it was a real living experience that I could just see right over, and I saw heaven. I saw the past, the present, and the future in there. It was as if I had transcended time and space and being and body, and the whole of life was revealed in there. I can't tell what I saw because it's a vision of such immensity that even my mouth wouldn't frame the words. But the result of it was a book called The Infinite Way and all the books that have come out of it. Infinity pouring itself through because of an attitude or altitude of consciousness. Now that is the purpose of our study. That is the purpose of our books. That is the purpose of our recordings, not the acquisition of more knowledge. Once you gain, well, someone said here the other day that on almost any of our 2-hour tapes, the entire principle is embodied. And yet there are hundreds of tapes, and each one of them embodying the entire principle, but in different forms. So it can't be that we listen to them for more knowledge. It certainly can't be that we go to classes for more knowledge. We go to be in the atmosphere of two or more who are met together in the name and nature of the Christ idea, so that we can sit here in an atmosphere of peace, joy, no desire except the desire to know God. It is for that reason that we come together, and each one of these experiences does lift us higher. And how do we know that? By the visible evidence that we have in the improved health of some of our students, the improved wealth in the experience of others, the improved family relations in the experience of others, the improved states of peace of mind or peace of soul of others. And so as we look around our student body, we see in their faces and in their pocketbooks and in their bodies the higher states of harmony. And we know by those effects that some measure of the Christ must have touched their consciousness. Now as we keep that up, we keep going on and on and on and on until we're doing less thinking, less comparing, less reasoning, less analyzing, and more of this attitude of speak, Father, speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. Because you see, the ultimate object of the Infinite Way message is to bring each one of us to a point of awareness, a point where we are receptive and responsive to the Christ within, to where we are all taught of God, to where within ourselves truth imparts itself. What you see, hear, read outside represents, of course, great truths about truth. But once you begin to hear the still small voice, once you begin to receive impartations from within, you have made your own contact with the source of your being. And from then on, you can clearly understand the Master when he says, "Oh, I have meat the world knows not." If you ask me, I could give you water, living waters, waters that spring up into life eternal. Oh, I am the bread of life. Ah, yes, I embody the bread, the wine, the water, the meat. All of that now is within me. Now I am living, moving, and having my being from the infinite source. Spiritual meat, spiritual wine, spiritual, the Word made flesh. Now the Word isn't something external to you. The Word isn't something in a book. The Word isn't something in a teacher's mouth. The Word is God uttering itself within you. An impartation from within. And the message of the Infinite Way has as its major purpose leading the student to that point of experience. The healings that take place, the improvement that takes place, the greater understanding that takes place, these are nothing but witnesses, evidences. The experience itself is what counts. And nobody on the spiritual path should ever be satisfied with a second-hand demonstration of God. Everyone should have within themselves such a desire to know and experience God that they can't take no for an answer. And then the Master says, for your much importuning, your much pleading, the door finally will be opened. And we must be careful that we're not pleading for new automobiles or new houses, that we're really pleading God, God. Not God for something's sake, God for God's sake, God for the experience sake, God for its own sake, with nothing else in mind further than the experience itself. Thank you.